Hello, this is Matt Fields, and I'm presenting with Joey Kendall Morwick, Managing Difficult Classroom Situations.
Classroom management. We all know that classroom management is a key and critical component for teachers in order to create an environment that optimizes the learning experience of students. Um, but one of the things that happens in the real-world classroom is that students exhibit behaviors that underline their own learning experience as well as the learning experience of their peers. We want to talk about three different student behaviors that end up undermining this environment. The first is a classroom discussion dominator. The second is called the shrinking violet, which is a shy or non-participating student. And the third is the unrelated subject chatterbox.
First is the classroom. Constantly raising your hand, constantly being called on, constantly having to share your opinion ends up with a one-dimensional discussion. The discussion is really a conversation between yourself and this dominating student. The class overall becomes disengaged, and unfortunately what we see is that it's a boring experience. Nobody wants to watch somebody else's conversation with the teacher, especially when they're not participating, they're not a part of the conversation, they're not contributing their ideas, they're not building on what's taking place. The solutions to the dominator: what we need to do is learn how to encompass the rest of the students and draw them into the conversation and feel like they're part of it. So one of the things we can do is ask others to add to Donald's response, right? So Donald raises his hand right off the bat, and um, we ask another student, can we add to that? Is there anything that Donald is missing in his response? Another solution is, instead of calling on Donald all the time with his hand raised, we can call on individual students and just avoid his hand. The other thing we can do is just to ask for an answer from another section of the room. So turn away from Donald, turn away from the attention-grabbing student into another section of the room and say, from this section of the room, does anybody want to respond to this? Finally, if the problem persists, we can talk to the student outside of class, pointing out the importance of letting quieter students answer the questions.
The second type of student that we want to talk about in our discussion of these problematic students and problematic behaviors is what's called the shrinking violet. The shrinking violet is a student who's not participating in class. They're reluctant to raise their hand. They're reluctant to get involved in the discussion. And while this doesn't create a disturbance for the rest of the students in the class, there are still problems that come from this type of student behavior. The first problem is that the student may not be engaged in class at all. They might be literally mentally checked out while they're sitting in your class. Um, and what happens, though, with this type of thing is that the student may eventually start to skip classes. If they're not there mentally, if they're only there physically, just being present, then why go to class at all? And the third thing that happens, though, and kind of most critically for our conversation, is that the class is deprived of their viewpoints. Whatever their experiences, whatever their background they're bringing to the table, each student is different and has something to contribute. And if they're not contributing to the classroom discussion, then the rest of the class is being deprived of that student's viewpoint and potentially enhancing the learning environment. So rather than just tell you what a teacher can do to kind of address this. We'll give our own solutions. But the next slide, we've actually found a video clip that illustrates how one teacher addressed the situation that we think is very, very, very good. So.
And Hardy. Now it's time for the highlight of the day. Star history teacher Ashley Ferguson has been running up them test scores over at Vince Clortho High.
Okay.
Woo!
Confederate forces fired first. Can anyone tell me where this battle took place?
Now, look at this. She looks left, then right, looks past the students with their arms up in the air, spots Max near the back, sees that even though his hand isn't up, he's engaged.
Max?
It was Fort Sumter.
That's right.
Oh, come on. See what she did there? She's bringing an introvert into the discussion, y'all. That's a Teacher of the Year play right there. That's right, Boyd. You know, the confidence gained by Max by answering that question correctly will enhance his performance throughout.
Okay, so that was a great example of how a teacher was able to draw in an introverted or non-participating student. So this is exactly what we need to do. We need to find ways to draw the student in a way that builds their confidence. The clip we just saw was a great example of a teacher looking out, seeing an engaged student who probably had something to say, not looking off out the window or just writing random notes to themselves. Rather, they were engaged in the conversation, probably had something to say, but just needed a little bit of encouragement. Finally, the other thing we can do is ask students outside of class about their thoughts about that day's topic. One of the ways that we can develop a rapport with students so they feel comfortable is say, what did you think about that? And as they're explaining their thoughts, we can say, wow, that would have been really valuable to have in the class, and here's how it would have changed the classroom discussion, and really encourage them to actually step up and participate in the classroom discussion. Finally, what we can do is ensure all students are getting proportionate attention during discussion to prevent just one single dominating viewpoint. There's a lot of students that you have. They're coming from very different places with very different types of experiences, and many times the things that they can add to the discussion will be very, very valuable. The last type of student that we want to talk about is the non-related chatterbox. And here what it is that these are people who are talking with each other and not about something that's a part of the classroom material. It's not the subject matter of the class itself. It's their own conversation. And that lack of engagement is contagious, unfortunately. So once you have a few people chattering, all of a sudden now we have a wide-scale problem. The resulting problems of this, there's a lack of coherence to the discussion overall, and several students can end up repeating the same points because they're not paying attention to other students as they're sharing those points. There's an insufficient amount of attention that's being paid to the instructor and other participants, so things are missed by students. They're not learning what they should be learning because they're not paying attention. And overall, we see that the class is disengaged. Solutions to the chatterbox problem. One thing we can do is reseat students. So this is actually physically move them around the room so that they're not next to their friends, their peer group that they want to be next to have these ongoing discussions that don't relate to the class material. Another thing we can do is to make a general announcement to ask the class to quiet down and listen to the student that's answering the question. And finally, if none of those things work, we can speak separately to the student outside of the class, pointing out that other students are distracted by their talking, by their conversations, and encouraging them to join in with the conversation and discussion the class is having in the appropriate time. That's all we wanted to share for this morning or this afternoon, depending on when you're watching this. Please thank you, and hopefully this will give you a little insight on how to handle some very common disruptive classroom behavior by students.